Alright, so Disco Godfather here. Um, I am making this video as part of a presentation on how to collect PSLs. And just to give you a little bit of background, I've been into PSLs. I've had a few over the last 15 years or so. This one I picked up in 2009. I've had a few that were really good. I've had a few that were not so great. This one is excellent. It's actually the only one I have right now. It's the only one I kept. And I'm kind of making this video out of frustration, really, because there aren't a lot of videos out there, or actually there are no videos out there that I'm aware of that really deal with the PSL from a collecting perspective. I've been on like gun boards and a bunch of other forums for years, and the PSL comes up all the time, and there's actually some great information in all these threads, but it's hard to pick out. There are a few web pages like dragonoff.net that has some decent information, but it's also not complete, and it's sometimes it's pretty difficult to tell because there's a lot of conflicting information out there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get to the bottom of it, present what I know to be true. A lot of it will probably be on the level of conjecture, unfortunately. I just want to immediately say in a disclaimer that I'm not an expert. I haven't done any professional research. This is just me collecting. I've maybe had about 6 of these over the last 15, 20 years, and just my observations and some of the information I managed to glean, taking notes over the years and stuff like that. So it's not authoritative, and your mileage may vary. So hopefully this will be a kind of a starting point. And if you see or hear information that you don't think is correct, or otherwise, make a comment. I'll probably put this video up on gun boards actually, so that maybe we can get a good conversation going, because these rifles really do warrant a lot of respect. I think they have a lot of value, and if you've been following the market for the last 3 to 5 years or so, you've seen them just go astronomical in price. And the problem I have with that is that I see guns going for a lot of money that I don't think really should warrant that kind of money, and I see the converse of that all the time too. I see guns that go for very little, and I'm like, wait a second, that's the most desirable one. So I think the collecting and market kind of community doesn't really understand how these things work. And there is some good information out there that we can use to at least not have these wild fluctuations in value going on. And hopefully this video will give you a basis the next time you look at Gunbroker or whatever, or pick one up, that you don't spend an inordinate amount of money on something that really is not original, or vice versa. Okay, so to get started here, I just want to again put out the disclaimer that this is an informal collection of information over some 15 years. I guess I could say 20 actually, because I saw my first PSL at a gun show in 1997. So it's been a while since I've been familiar with these rifles, but I really got more serious about it, started owning them within the last 15 years. I'm not an expert, and some things might be wrong in this video. Please just leave a comment or say so, and hopefully we can get to the bottom of this. Some people have an amazing level of information. Somebody maybe did the research already and found things. There are probably a lot of other people like me who are interested and have kind of been taking notes. Maybe we can compare notes. So this is a collection of notes, basically. So the first thing, I don't want to get into heavy history of the PSL. Honestly, there are probably some other videos that maybe get into this a little bit better. Just suffice to say, we'll go through it fairly quickly. The PSL was developed in the early 1970s in Romania. It shared a kind of a common ancestor with or a common development program, I should say, with the Zastava M76. Apparently, what happened was, like with most Eastern Com Bloc countries, they didn't want to adopt the Russian Dragunov, which had been around at that time for probably nearly a decade. They thought they could do it better themselves. They already had arms factories producing all kinds of stuff, RPKs, other rifles, other AK pattern rifles. So they said, hey, we're going to do our own thing. It was very common. Just look at the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, Serbia, Poland, all the Eastern Com Bloc countries, for the most part, developed their own stuff. A lot of them didn't. A lot of them also just adopted other Russian designs directly, like literally bought Dragunovs. But by the early 1970s, it was clear that the Romanian military, and I suppose the Serbian military too, Yugoslavian military, they wanted a DMR rifle, a rifle that you could use in the role of kind of, in between a sniper and maybe just a standard infantry rifle. Not quite as accurate, but more mobile. More for suppression fire and shooting at machine gun nests and stuff like that. So it was the era of the DMR, and everybody was kind of following suit. At some point during the development project, the Romanians said, okay, we're going to take, they'd been making RPKs for years, and they said, okay, we're just going to take our RPK knowledge and adapt a rifle off of that, meaning a stamped receiver with a slightly larger front trunnion, more bulked up front trunnion, adapted for 7.62 by 54. The Serbians, the engineers of Zastava decided, no, we're going to do a milled receiver and we're going to do it in 8mm. So, not a lot of interchangeability with those rifles. They're completely different, but it's interesting to note that they had the same design genesis, at least for a while, or the same development program. Essentially, the PSL has been used by the Romanian military since then. That's what I can find online, and I believe it to be true. There's some pictures that pop up here and there, guys training and stuff like that. So it's still there. It's still being offered by the modern manufacturer of the PSL, which is essentially Romarm, which is the state-owned defense contractor. So it's still a thing. This isn't a forgotten weapon. This is a current weapon. What we do know is that early imports began through a bunch of commercial contracts in the mid to late 1990s. This is pretty much the best information that we have. I don't believe that there were a lot of, or any, I can find no information anywhere that there is anything such as a pre-ban PSL. So kind of pre-1989. I think between the 1974 till the fall of the Soviet Union, and the fall of communism in general, I don't believe that there were any commercial contracts. I've never seen a rifle that has come out that someone said, oh yeah, I got this in 1982, here it is. They seem to be non-existent. The first guns that I've seen personally, I was at a gun show in 1997 and I saw an IO import which was built on a US-made receiver, and that was the first time I had ever seen one. So if you have other information about that, maybe you even have one, that would be great. Pictures, any kind of history or story, that would be great. But I don't see a lot of evidence anywhere that any guns came in what I'm going to be calling later on the military era, which is from 1974 till the fall of communism in the early 90s. Another really important thing to consider is that PSLs are considered sporting rifles. They're not subject to 922R laws. This is very confusing because, most AKs are considered military rifles, and they have various configuration issues when they are imported into the United States. Various things have happened, especially over the course of the last 20 years, that prevent things like barrels and a certain number of parts from coming into the United States, or even completed rifles from coming into the United States. PSLs don't follow that. It is possible, especially since the mid 90s until, I'm going to say, until around 2008 or so, that these rifles were imported as complete functioning rifles. They did not have to be modified in any way, and that they were made of Romanian parts and they were assembled in Romania. So they're not subject to 922R. And that's because they're considered a sporting rifle. They have a thumbhole stock. They don't feed from high-capacity magazines, etc., etc. I won't get into all the specifics of that, but suffice to say, if you look at a PSL and some guy's like, well, the receiver's made in the USA and the barrel's made in the USA because blah, 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 they couldn't come in as completed guns, you kind of have to scratch your head and say, well, that might be true, but for other reasons. So you can have a real Romanian-made and a Romanian-assembled gun that made it into the United States as a completed rifle, period. So for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to call these things PSLs. There's a huge, argument going online all the time is like, oh, they're not PSLs. PSL, you see the Romanian term there. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but it means essentially semi-automatic scoped rifle. And that's what Romarm, the current producer of these guns, on their website calls it. So I'm going to call it a PSL. Some people say, oh, it's better to call it an FPK because the Romanians called it that originally as a project designation. Again, because it's based on the RPK, but that's going to get really confusing shortly here when we get into some of the importers' kind of marketing names that they came up with these rifles. So I just want to stay away from the FPK because it's just confusing. We'll just call it a PSL. If that's not 100% accurate, then I apologize in advance. But it's going to be a lot easier to understand it. And this presentation and this knowledge covers U.S. imports. It doesn't cover the international market. The international market is another animal. You're going to see in short order here that it's very complicated just to understand the U.S. imports. When we get into the international guns, or if we got into the international guns, we'd be here for an extremely long time because there's very little information about that. But suffice to say that various forms of the Cougar factory produced different styles of PSLs for different markets. I don't know actually even where they went, if they went to maybe Britain or something like that, somewhere in Europe, as, non kind of military type rifles. They had different stocks. They were basically PSLs, but they were modified more for sporting stuff. So we're gonna just concentrate on the U.S. guns. Okay, so one quick thing about the PSL too in terms of history. This is a real modern military rifle that's currently in service, and it's seen all kinds of action. I mean, this thing has been around the world. You can see on the right-hand side there all the different wars that this has been in, and including wars that U.S. servicemen and women have been involved in. And I consider that to be very important because, this is part of our history as a country too, because these rifles were used against us in many situations. So, there's a special level of, kind of interest in this, not for any kind of morbid reasons, but because, I had a personal friend who was in the Army in Iraq in around 2008, and he swears that he was shot at by one of these. He wasn't hit, thank God, but he thinks he saw a guy running around about 300 or 400 meters away. He was doing some kind of convoy protection type stuff, and he thinks a guy shot at him with one of these things. So that's pretty interesting. He always gets a little nervous when we go to the range. He's like, that gun scares me a little bit. So that's that's interesting stuff to me. That's part of American military history. It's not just some comm block thing. And of course, on the left-hand side here, you see all the different countries that adopted this rifle. So tons of countries all over the place. It's a very one of the things that we're going to get into is that nobody really seems to know how many PSLs were built. I have no idea personally. I've never seen anybody publish any figures. We just don't know. But considering how many wars it's been in, considering how many countries have adopted it in some limited way or another, it's pretty interesting stuff. We need to maybe look for this information and try to figure it out. All right, this is just a quick map of Romania, just to get started out with. That little red dot here is where Sugira is. Sugira is located in Transylvania. That's another kind of cool thing. These guns were made in Transylvania. How many people have guns that were made in Transylvania? That's super cool. And over here we have Bucharest. We'll talk about Bucharest a little bit because are elements of some of these companies that exist in Bucharest as well. It's not just about Suger. And another thing interesting to note is that Suger is about 200 miles away from Bucharest. That's just, using Google Maps there. Thought it was interesting. All right, so let's talk about the location and some of the factory relationships, where these things were made, what are the companies, how does it all break down? Because a lot of these terms are thrown around loosely online. You'll get into some argument on the forums and somebody will say, oh, you're not referring to something correctly, it's this, it's that. So this is the research that I've managed to do over the last couple of years. Again, it might be incomplete. But, Cugir, C-U-G-I-R, is actually a city in central Romania and Transylvania. It's not really a city, it's a town. It's got 21,000 people. And that's where the Cugir Arms Factory is located. And that is an extremely old arsenal that has existed since the Austro-Hungarian Empire days. So 150 years. And they continue to sell PSLs. I don't know if they make them still, but they still continue to sell them, and many other weapons, many other small arms, AK pattern rifles, PKMs, anti-aircraft stuff even, or big machine guns, and all kinds of stuff. We're going to get into the different eras of what the companies are, because the Suger Arms Factory, the Cugir Arms Factory, I'll call it Cugir for the sake of this video. That's another area of misinterpretation. People don't know how to pronounce Cougar. Some say Suger. I don't know what it is. I'll just call it Cugir. Cugir, the arms factory, and of course the town, that's been there forever, and that's where these things are made. But the companies that have owned them and the kind of the way that they've run it, and the subsidiary companies, that's changed over the years. After what I'm calling the military era, after the fall of the Soviet Union, between around 1994 to 2004, it was essentially called Rat Mill. And you see what that, I'm not going to try to, it's not too hard. Regia Autonoma de Tecnica Militaria. Okay. That was the name of the company or the business entity that kind of took it over. And you'll see a lot of guns that are labeled Rat Mill. Then after 2004, what happened was the Romania joined NATO, and That's when a lot of things changed, and there was a lot of actually consolidation. So before the Soviet era, everything was like consolidated. It was all the state. Then during the rat mill era, it was kind of broken apart, and then during the NATO era, or what I'm calling the Romarm era, is when it was taken over by this company called Romarm, which is a giant conglomerate, state-owned, or at least partly state-owned, defense contractor within Romania. And they make everything, and they have, hundreds of factories. They're humongous. It's just a tiny little part of their repertoire. And currently, Romarm is the absolute parent company of the whole thing. The actual company that's referred to for this presentation, and it's actually marked on most of the later guns, is SC Cougar Arms Factory SA, and they are a subsidiary of Romarm. I've also heard it said and referred to that there's a kind of an intermediary company involved that's kind of above the SC Cougar Arms Factory SA that's referred to as Fabrica de Armi Cougar SA. And they are, a kind of a slightly higher, I guess, maybe subsidiary, but still everything is under the Romarm name. And the Romarm is the master company. This is just a photograph of that, the way these guys go to shows. I think this was like a show in Europe somewhere, some kind of arms show. And you see the Army Cougar logo there. And you see a bunch of different rifles. You see some PSLs. I think there are 2 PSLs there, a bunch of AK patterns, also these weird bolt-action rifles, pretty interesting stuff. But they make a lot of stuff. They make PKMs. They make all kinds of interesting. And you see in the back here, way in the back, you see the Romarm logo. So they're the big daddies. All right, this is a photograph of, and this is the only photograph I know of in existence of the actual Cougar factory. Not much to see, but that's it. If you have some other photographs, that would be great, or anything. For the purpose of the history lesson here, I'm going to call the different eras of PSL manufacturing, I'm going to call them in 3 different parts. Like I said before, the military era, which is the Romanian communist era. Again, very little information about whatever was imported during that era, if anything. Then there is the rat mill era, which occurred directly after the fall of the Soviet Union sometime. I'm not really 100% sure, sometime between maybe 1991 and 1994-ish. And during this era, you see the first imports into the United States pop up, maybe as early as 95, 96, sometime in that era. Definitely in kits. You see a lot of kits coming in. Not 100% sure when full rifles came in, or even if any full completed rifles came in from Romania in that time frame. We'll get into that a little bit later. And then there's what I'm calling the Romarm era, which is the modern NATO super big defense company era between 2004 up until today. And I can honestly say that most imports occurred during this period, including all the full rifles, what I'm going to be calling rifles that are both made of Romanian parts and assembled in Romania and shipped as completed rifles. And then for some reason, and I'm not 100% sure when this happened, it could have happened as early as around 2008 or 2009, but what I started to see was that there was a real dry up of these rifles in about 2010 and 2011, with maybe one exception that happened in 2013, but I think those were not related to any imports that occurred in that year. They were just old kits lying around. So things dried up mysteriously in 2010. It's weird. All right, so this is where, things might get a little controversial, but again, I'm not trying to push any kind of an agenda here. I'm just talking about this in the sense of collecting. What is more valuable? We go to Gunbroker, we go to gun shows, whatever, we're on forums. These things come up all the time, and it's so hard to tell what is going on, and is this real, or was this something that was assembled in the United States, or what's the story? So for the purposes of just this presentation, I'm going to organize the value of these guns into 4 tiers. The first tier is made up of guns that are made in Romania from all Romanian parts, assembled in Romania, and shipped into the USA in one piece. Now, you might have a different idea of what is more valuable to you, but that's what's most valuable to me. And I think in a collecting perspective, that's what's most valuable, is that we want a gun from the original factory with the history that comes with, the people, Romanian people making this gun. It's more valuable than something that was made in the United States or assembled in the United States. Just going to say that. Take it with a grain of salt. Your mileage might vary. Your value system might vary. Tier 2 are guns that were made in Romania from Romanian parts, meaning all the parts were Romanian parts. But they came into the United States at different times in pieces, essentially, including receivers, actual receivers that were made in Romania, but they were shipped and then made in the United States, or assembled in the United States. And all the importers did this stuff, I'm convinced. And it's going to be really hard when we get down to trying to parse which manufacturer and which era gets to go into tier 1, tier 2, and everything. Tier 3 guns, they're actually fairly straightforward. There's not a lot of mystery about those. Those are just guns that were Romanian parts kits, and they're usually always marked made in the USA on the receiver. They're made of US receivers, and they were obviously assembled here in the USA. Nobody sent US-made receivers to Romania to put them together. So those are actually fairly straightforward. And then tier 4 is just kind of a wild card. You're gonna see a lot of guns. I've seen a lot of stuff out there that's like kind of home build or really small, kind of maybe even mom and pop style builds, like somebody got a couple of kits and made a run or something like that. They're kind of a wild card in terms of value. Like if you had a guy like Jim Fuller made one of these things, then that's going to be worth a lot of money. So it's not as if tier 4 is the absolute lowest value. It can be the lowest or it can be the highest. It's in general, if you're buying a gun that was put together by somebody and nobody really knows who it was, and it's, even if it's kind of correct and it has Romanian-made parts, all Romanian-made parts, and it matches and all that stuff, it's still, it's probably not going to be the same level of value as some of these other guns, unless you know who made it. And I know that some custom builders actually did make these rifles, and they're maybe some of the best ones, and they have their own kind of valuation system. But for the most part, we're just going to keep to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Tier 4 is just, it's a wild card. Like with everything else, matching numbers increases the value. Non-matching decreases. We'll get into what was numbered, and then it actually changed in different eras. And in general, the value is also intrinsically linked to the condition. I mean, if the thing has 40,000 rounds through it and somebody used it as a boat anchor, obviously it's not going to be worth as much as everything else. So, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 is mainly, we're going to concentrate on guns that are in good condition and stuff like that. We're not going to factor in, whether or not it was abused or something. All right, so in terms of major importers, there were a lot of importers of PSLs, guys. I mean, it was just, I've seen some, things that I would, really boggle the mind, like really small little companies here and there. It's very difficult to tell. This is by no means a master list. This is just what I would consider to be the ones that I've observed to be the most, the biggest ones. If you have some more information on that, let me know. But from my perspective and my limited research, these were the big ones. Intrac was one that did a lot of kits and kit builds. IO was actually, and yeah, that's IO Inch Incorporated, the same one that we all know in the AK community. They imported kits and started building them into rifles in the late 90s. That's actually the first time I ever saw one. I saw one of these SSG 97s in 1997 at a gun show, and I was like, whoa, what is that? That was my first introduction. I had no idea what a PSL was. Then there's TDI of Knoxville. They imported as kits. They also supposedly imported complete rifles. They built off of U.S. receivers. They built off Romanian receivers. They kind of did a little bit of everything. They're the ones that you're going to see labeled FPK and FPK Dragunov. And those started probably in the early 2000s and continued up into the late 2000s. And then the biggest importer by far was Century, and they imported complete rifles, kits, Romanian receiver guns, U.S. receivers guns. They were marketed as the Romac 3, the PSL 54C, and the PSL 54. And they started probably in the early 2000s is when you saw a few. I think they started selling kits in that era. And then by the mid 2000s, they really ramped it up, and kind of the golden age of their importing was probably between about 2006 till about 2009. And they also did a very limited release in 2013 of rifles that were essentially just they were kit builds, essentially. They were not imported in 2013, I don't think, and they were built off Nodak receivers, so it was very easy. They're what I would refer to as a tier 3 gun. One of the stories that pops up quite a bit is so Century had been importing probably some completed rifles, and had also been assembling kits for a few years in the early 2000s under the Romac 3 name. These were all Rat Mill era guns. They first began to import Romarm stuff in about 2006 or so, and there was a little bit of an issue in those years with this concept of what they call a third hole rifle. Right in front of the trigger pin, and in between the trigger pin and the central receiver support pin, kind of lower down, you can see it there in the picture here with this red arrow, there was a third hole because the PSLs use a secondary safety sear, or at least they did. And those secondary safety sears, even though the PSL was never designed to go fully automatic, it had an issue where the ATF, I guess, originally allowed Century to bring these in, but then, I don't know, changed their minds. I'm not 100% sure what happened. But this third hole was associated with some kind of ability to go fully automatic. I have no idea how that supposedly worked out, but they had an actual recall. Century recalled all of them, and the people that didn't respond to Century's calls for the recall, some people, there are stories that ATF agents appeared at their door and were like, "Hey, give it to me." So, every Century was cool about it. They gave everybody a new rifle that didn't have this problem, but that was an interesting aside in terms of these kind of early Romarm era Century imports. Okay, let's talk a little bit about manufacturers' ID markings. In general, if you get into Romanian firearms that have been imported into the United States, you're going to realize pretty quickly that the Romanians were not the nation that, marked their rifles in anything other than what I would call a sparingly in a sparing fashion. And if you look at a Russian gun or you look at something else, they have all kinds of marks and proof marks and all kinds of stuff. The Romanians, they're very, very limited in what they marked. Don't know why that is. I've heard it postulated several times on forums from other enthusiasts that say, well, they wanted to make it as easy for importers as possible to kind of use their own model names and stuff like that. I don't know. I've never been able to confirm that that's the reason. Essentially, the military era guns are marked, and these are actual military guns that the Romanian military used, and it's possible that they exported to other countries, but there's just very little to no information about that. Those military era guns are marked in front of the magwell, and they have on the receiver, and they have a date. They have a little triangle with an arrow and a date and a serial number. That's how you know a military era gun. I've never seen one in the United States. I don't think I've ever seen one. Maybe somebody has one. That would be very interesting to look at. That would indicate that a gun actually did come into the United States as a military gun, which is really highly problematic. We'll get into that a little bit later. And the rifles of the rat mill era, they had the most wide variety of markings, and it's really unclear where they were marked or if they even had any kind of standard. You've got to realize that rat mill era guns were from an era after the fall of the Soviet Union until 2004, until Romania joined NATO, where all of these Eastern Combloc countries, not just Romania, had serious problems. I mean, it was chaotic. The economies crashed. All kinds of things were happening. It was not a very, very steady time. Things got a lot better in the NATO era. And then the later, what I'm going to call the second generation Romarm guns that were imported by Century in the late 2000s, they actually have fairly uniform markings. I actually haven't seen any different markings on those guns. They're usually always in the same place, and they usually always say the same thing. So this is an example of the military era markings. You see the triangle with an arrow, kind of looks like an Izhvesk mark, the year, and then a serial number. You also see the era that's from, obviously. The rat mill era markings, and these were from a variety of importers. They just seem to have all kinds of different standards. Looking at the left-hand side there, we see, one that's marked up by the gas block, or excuse me, not the gas block, the sight block. And then, typically the front trunnion is also marked in that location pretty much uniformly. If you see the one in the middle there towards the top, that appears to be a very, very early Century import, and that was also on the sight block, and you can see there how kind of crude it is. In the lower central one, these are the ones that I've personally seen. I owned one of these, and I remember it being very similar to this. An early Century gun. It's called Romac 3. If you look at the style of the markings, they're kind of basically electropencil. Maybe electropencil with like a template or something like that, because they're a little bit cleaner usually than just really ghetto electropencil, but they're still very crude, fairly crude. And on the right-hand side there, you'll see, and this is one of the first guns I ever saw at a show. This isn't a picture of it, but I mean, I saw one of these types of guns, an SSG 97, which was marketed by and made by IO Incorporated. And it just says made in the USA on it, so it's pretty straightforward. SSG is German for Scharfschützengewehr, so you're going to have to ask IO why they called a Romanian rifle a German name. Basically called it a German sniper rifle. So kind of a strange marketing choice. The one I owned was, it was okay. I ended up picking one up years after I'd first seen it, probably sometime maybe 2003, 2004, and it was fine. It shot okay. Wasn't the most accurate. It had some problems. It had a really weird magwell situation going on, and it didn't like to feed well. All right, and then there's the Romarm era markings. This would be 2004 up. These are the ones that TGI imported. TGI of Knoxville, Tennessee, and they are they're not they're strange. TDI was the one company that did a little bit of everything, and they're in many ways the hardest to tell what they actually are. Some of the rifles that they brought in, it's been claimed on forums for years that they were in fact just completed rifles, and the ones that were assembled in Romania and imported. Others, it's really obvious, like if you look at the right-hand side there, the first receiver there is obviously a Nodak. So it's made in the USA. Obviously, that wasn't, that rifle was made in the United States. But they have these weird rifles that are labeled made in Romania. And the theory there, one of the theories I've heard, is that they got a bunch of receivers, and this is the same of Century, too. Century did this, too. They got receivers that were actually made in Romania. When they got here, they marked them themselves, and then they assembled them using Romanian parts kits. So it's 100% Romanian parts. There's not one U.S. part on it, but it was not assembled in Romania. So that's a curveball. And whenever I've dealt with TDI in the past, they're the one company that I'm always like, this is going to be difficult to tell. It's really going to be difficult to tell, because a lot of people will say, oh yeah, this was assembled in Romania, and then it was just engraved here or something like that, and it's an actual real bona fide Romanian assembled and made rifle. But it's murky, guys. It's real murky. One theory I've heard too is that some were labeled FPK, just FPK, and that means that they were the ones that were assembled in the United States, and the ones that are labeled FBK Dragunov are the ones that were actually made in Romania. And whether or not they were assembled in Romania or assembled in the United States, that's the question. If anybody can prove or have some information about that, I'm completely unsure about that stuff. I did buy a TDI rifle at one point, and I was very interested to know, and I remember trying to contact TGI, and they, I remember emailing them, and they said something like, all the FPK Dragunovs were made in Romania, but they wouldn't say if it was assembled in Romania. So, I wish I had saved the emails, but I didn't. That was like maybe 2006 or something like that. They also produced these paratrooper models, which are very rare. They kind of have collectability in and of themselves. I'm really not sure if those were original. I don't think the Romanians ever produced anything like that. I think that was just kind of like a U.S. type thing where they took a U.S.-made barrel and built a kit off of it, and instead of a 26-inch barrel, they used a shorter barrel. Some of them are marked underneath the or in front of the magwell on the receiver. Others are marked on the sight block. All right, so the Romarm eras, and these are the ones that I would consider to be the most uniform and the safest bet in general, because I've discovered some information that, I feel comfortable when I say that if your rifle is marked this way, it was made in Romania and it was assembled in Romania. I believe this to be true, and I'll show you the proof of that, or my theory behind it. These are all, I've owned several of these, and they were all marked made by CN Romarm SA/Sugir in Romania. And that appeared underneath the ejection port on the side of the receiver, and on the other side, you'd say the scope mounting side, in the front of the receiver, they were labeled with a model name and the caliber, and sometimes they're labeled PSL 54s. The rifle that I showed in the beginning of this video, the one I currently own, is labeled PSL-54. Others were labeled PSL-54C. And there have been some theories about that the ones that are labeled C, meaning maybe Century, those were the ones that were put together in the United States by Century, and the ones that are labeled PSL-54 without the C are actually the original Romanian guns, Romanian assembled guns. Again, I don't know for sure. I don't know if that's true. I've just heard that postulated a bunch of times. Maybe it makes some kind of sense. I don't know why I don't even really know when they changed these model name designations. I bought my rifle that I showed earlier that's labeled PSL-54. I bought that in 2009. So, I'm not sure. I owned a 54C, and it seemed like that was earlier. I'd bought that one maybe in 2007, and I've since gotten rid of it. But if your rifle is labeled with the made by CN Romarm SA-Sugir, I'm going to get into why I think that's the most desirable one. Alright, so this is a photograph from Romarm's current website, where they call this thing a PSL. They have some stats on it, and they have two photos, just two side views, one on the right side, one on the left side of the rifle. And it's interesting just to see it. It actually doesn't have a bayonet lug. It looks to have the flash hider that is pinned to the barrel. It doesn't look like it has the removable flash hider. And this is what I would consider to be, if the company of Romarm is putting this up on their website, this is a pretty good rifle to look at in terms of, okay, this is the authentic one. And if you notice here on the ejection port side of the rifle, there do not appear to be any markings anywhere on the receiver there. If you go to the other side of the rifle, and I'm sorry for the really bad quality blow up of image here, but I've actually looked at this. I put it in Photoshop even and tried to make it a little bit sharper, but underneath the scope rail on the scope rail side of the rifle, on the receiver, it says made by CN Romarm SA-Cougar. So to me, this is at least some level of proof. I mean, they put this up on their website, right? This is, how the factory in Romania, labels their guns. And it looks to be the same style of label. We'll get into some of the different labeling styles in a little bit, because, Sugir or Cougar seems to be using a format that is a dot matrix type CNC marking, and they've been using that since the late 2000s, and it's a great way of saying, okay, well, this is a real rifle, this is a Romanian assembled rifle, because we see it here on their website in 2017. We see it on all the guns that came out of the later Romarm era, especially the ones out of Century, and they all say the same thing. So this is a lot of evidence to suggest this is bona fide. It's difficult to say with some of the other era guns. The Rat Mill era guns, they kind of make my head hurt because I've seen them marked in so many different ways. I had a few that were marked in different ways, and they were actually marked Sugir. or Cougar. And they were marked, with other ID markings that, seemed authentic, and they seemed like they were built in Romania. So I'm not saying they weren't, but it's another level of curveball. At least we can say with the Romarm era Century rifles and the current PSL model that we see on the website of the company, they're marked in the same way. Made by CN Romarm SA/Cougar. All right, let's talk a little bit about numbers matching. I didn't want to include any photos of this because I don't want people to start faking stuff. Let's just, say, okay, uh, the cost of these rifles is getting to the point where I think some unscrupulous people would start to fake things maybe. So I'm just going to keep the pictures of what these serial numbers actually look like, because they're different. Some are stamp marks, some are this kind of weird dot matrix CNC style, some are the older style military rifles and military kits were definitely done in a different way. It was like kind of more of a defined, clear, kind of continuous engraving. But the most important thing to understand is PSLs do, in fact, have many matching numbered parts that are supposed to be matching. The older military kits that I've seen, the ones that are kind of beat up and seem to have been kind of surplus, disassembled rifles that came from the military era, those are basically they have 4-digit numbers on the top cover, bolt carrier, bolt, gas tube, usually a marking on the upper handguard on the inside, and on the trunnion, front trunnion, and the receiver. Of course, there's not a lot. I've never seen a Romanian military receiver in the United States. I don't think they were allowed to come in for a lot of reasons. There were 2-digit numbers on the recoil spring guide rod, the trigger, secondary sear, hammer, safety lever block, and the flash hider. So those are the ones that really had a lot of matching numbers. The rat mill era guns, I've seen them in various states of, having all of those or some of those, but the more modern Romarm era guns, almost all of them that I've seen or owned have just five matching parts, and the rest of the parts that would have been marked with the older military kits, they're just not marked. It's not that they have another number on it, they just don't have any part, and there's no sign that they were scrubbed or anything of these numbers or anything like that. It's just they look like they were manufactured that way, and they look like they were not marked. So on the Romarm era guns, you have the top cover, bolt carrier, bolt gas tube. It's kind of strange, and the front trunnion. Those are the five matching parts for the Romarm era guns. All right, this is where we're going to get into some of the major curveballs, because this is where my knowledge kind of ends, and I've always had questions about this, and it never quite 100% makes sense. There is a theory that's been postulated by a lot of guys that I respect that says that all PSLs that are imported as complete rifles that came in as assembled, in Romania and sent to the United States, they're all remanufactured military rifles. And the idea here is that, and this goes back to the Gun Control Act of 1968, basically, foreign nations cannot just decommission military rifles and then ship them into the United States for sale. That can't happen. You can't do that. You have to break the gun down and either remanufacture them or manufacture them new. And that's pretty obvious. That's why I think we don't see any military marked military era style markings on receivers in the United States. I just haven't seen any. The question here, though, is, so one of the ideas is that the Romanians and the Cougar Arms Factory, during Soviet times, they built the hell out of these things. They built large numbers, let's say. And then they decommissioned some of those rifles over time, or they had a lot of extras. And then getting into after the fall of the Soviet Union, and they wanted to get into commercial sales and they wanted to export stuff. They basically took those kits and made new receivers for them and then reassembled them. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that, because especially among the rat mill era guns, there are a lot of kind of markings on them, kind of like proof marks. There's a lot of those like triangle type marks here and there, like on the trunnions and stuff like that. And, you could easily see those guns being assembled from decommissioned rifles and then maybe given new barrels and new receivers and then put together and shipped out. There's a little bit of a... So one theory is that they were developed in the 70s, manufactured in the 70s and the 80s, and that since then they actually haven't made anything new. Maybe they make some barrels, maybe they make some receivers, but there's nothing new. They're not still cast forging trunnions. They're not doing anything new, and they're basically working off of an old stock. Maybe a new old stock you would call it. And the theory against that, or the information, or some of the evidence against that, would be that, like on my 2009 Romarm marked gun, I don't get the feeling like any of those parts were manufactured in the 70s, in some kind of military era, and then either scrubbed or remarked or something like that later on. They're marked in a modern CNC kind of dot matrix way. All their ID marks are like that, including the serial number on the trunnion. So, I just have trouble believing that was, manufactured in the 70s, and this is just all some kind of new old stock. I would tend to think more that they were manufactured, even today, or in the last 10 years. So that's a big question. Are these all just military manufactured rifles, essentially surplus kits, or did they continue to make these, and are they continuing to make these and selling them? Big question. There's another big theory that goes around quite a bit that is about the scopes. So the scopes are made by IOR in Bucharest. Very famous. IOR Valdata makes some of the best scopes in the world nowadays. They're really killing the market in terms of modern optics right now. They have some scopes that rival the best German stuff. They're really amazing. And IOR developed the scope for the PSL, and there is a theory that's circulated all the time that originally, when either the guns were remanufactured or manufactured, depending on what you believe in terms of point number one there, that these scopes were matched to the rifle and that they had matching serial numbers. But then that changed, I guess, during the importation process, like it got screwed up. That's a weird theory for me, because I look at a lot of these scopes, and the one my rifle came with is not matching. I don't think I've ever seen one that's matching. Maybe somebody has one that is, but it seems strange to me because the scopes were manufactured probably at all kinds of different times. Some people seem to claim that if you have fitment issues with the scope, that it's a sign that it doesn't have its matching component, and there was something that they did at the factory. We saw earlier on the map that Cougar is 200 miles away from Bucharest, so that would have been maybe a little difficult logistically to pull off, to match a rifle to a scope and make sure that it was shooting correctly or do some kind of test on it. So I'm just very highly skeptical that scopes were matched to the rifle. I have heard another theory that says that scopes were matched to the rifle by a card. There was a card. So the scope itself didn't have a matching serial number to the rifle. They were different. But at the factory, they put a card on the scope, and the card actually has two numbers. Kind of like a Russian PU sniper, if you're familiar with those. The scope is maybe a different number than the mount is a different number than the rifle, but then it has a card that kind of ties them all together. I don't know. I've never seen one of these cards. If somebody has a card, please, pictures and, you know, that would be great. But I really have a lot of trouble believing that scopes were matched to these rifles. It doesn't seem to make that much sense. There have been a lot of reports over the years that scopes didn't fit very well to the rifles, and I think there's a very easy explanation for that, is that a lot of these kit builds that came in, a lot of these Romanian receivers that came in, didn't have scope rails. So fly-by-night, machine shops, contracts that even some of these large importers had, they developed a scope rail for it, and it was just totally out of spec, and they just slapped it together and sold it that way. That's why scopes don't fit very well in some rifles. The scope on my rifle, which is not at all matching to the rifle, it fits it perfectly, absolutely perfectly. There's no wiggle. It's rock solid. You could do a push-up on the scope and it would not move the scope mount. It's completely solid. So I have a lot of trouble believing that scopes were matched to the rifle. If you have some other information on that, let me know. The other thing is the magazine matching theory. This is another one that boggles me because, my PSL came, or all the PSLs that I've had came with non-matching magazines. And somebody's like, oh, when they were at the factory, they matched, that all the magazines have a 4-digit number on them usually, or sometimes a 5-digit number. And they're like, oh, yeah, they were matched at one time. And that's hard to believe, okay? Because typically, most of these PSLs, including the one that I have now that I bought in 2009 and some of the other ones that I've owned over the years, they came with 4 mags, and they also came with a military-style pouch that held 4 magazines. And I don't know what people are saying. Are they saying that the military guys had 4 magazines and they were all numbered to their rifle and they carried that around? Like, what happened when they lost one magazine? I haven't seen too many PSL magazines that don't have any numbers on them. From my experience, almost all of them are numbered. So it's another theory that I just don't understand. Maybe somebody has some information on this, but I just have real problems believing that the scopes and the magazines were matched to the rifle. I don't get it. The other super huge information gap or mystery is, why did these PSL imports dry up? Romania, it's not like Russia. There's no sanctions against Romania. We get along with them. They're in NATO. They're our friends. Why? Personally, I believe that around 2009, somewhere in that time frame, everything stopped. And it was like, why, considering how much these rifles are going for, some of these tier 1 rifles are going for $3,000 nowadays. Seems like there would be a lot of companies or somebody, I don't know, obviously Century has changed its trajectory in terms of, they don't want to be doing military imports or whatever anymore, but it still is kind of strange. Like, why did they dry up? And one of the theories that I see totally talked about all the time is this fertile crescent. I call it the fertile crescent theory. And this is this story that, Romanian Romarm got all these contracts from, countries in the Middle East that, needed them, and they were much more lucrative than selling them to the American market. And they just don't want to sell to the United States anymore because they have a military contract, which, Who they went to, I have no idea. I mean, you see them sometimes. They're used a lot by the Kurdish Peshmerga, kind of all over Syria and in Iraq and all that stuff. Maybe them. I really don't know. You see them in Iraqi militia hands a lot. I'm not saying it's not true, but it's a little vague. There's also a theory that there were a lot of political problems with Romania, and they didn't want to ship to the United States for some reason. Again, not very well supported. There's even a kind of a crazy theory that the the mafia controls Romania, and they're controlling the arms trade, and no U.S. companies are afraid to deal with them or something like that. I don't know what the hell, really, honestly. There's so much stuff out there, but it still seems supremely mysterious to me that these things aren't being currently imported, because they appear on Romarm's website. They're still being used. They're very popular. If somebody could get together with Romarm and actually do a really high quality, rifle, and then import them and then tell everybody for sure this was made in Romania, that seems like it would be a huge win. I mean, I would be interested in buying a rifle like that, and it's just kind of strange. It's very strange that these things are not currently being imported anymore. All right, just to end with a summation here. I'm sorry this video has gone on long enough. It's probably an hour long at this point. But these are some of the ideas that I feel, are the conclusions that I've come to. Again, take it with a grain of salt. But I feel as if when we're talking about collecting these and being sure, and the kind of thing that I would look at personally in an auction or whatever, on a gun show, the rifles that I seek out are going to be the ones that are labeled made by CN Romarm SA-Cougar in a dot matrix like CNC marking. It's kind of faint, but it's there. It's usually always below the ejection port, about 2.5 millimeters tall. Each character is about 2.5 millimeter tall, and I consider that to be one of the gold standards, because I see that on their website. That's the marking system that they still use, and that's the phrase that they still use. It's in a different location, but it's exactly the same. So those are the guns that I would feel like, hey, I feel good about this. Some of the other ones, I'm like, hey, I really have to take a look at it. One of the problems is that a lot of guys are looking at stuff through the internet. We're looking at Gunbroker, the other auction sites, and it's very difficult to see these things sometimes, very difficult to contact the seller and ask them to take pictures, extra pictures, and send them to you and stuff like that. It's just difficult to get the information. So if I can see that phrase, I'm already like, okay, this is better. I feel a little bit more comfortable about this. Again, I want a tier 1 gun. I mean, I've owned other tiers. I've owned tier 2, tier 3 guns as well. But if I'm going to pay the upper end of value for these guns, I want to know that it is a tier 1 gun, that it was made in Romania and assembled in Romania. The later Romarm guns, too, the ones that were imported, say, sometime between 2005 and 2009, I just find them to have a lot higher quality fit and finish. They have uniform markings. They appear to be original to me, and they seem like they're the best candidates for this one was originally made in Romania, and it's a tier 1 gun. So that's what I look for. Again, you might accuse me of having a Romarm bias, but that's the truth. I think that they are the best era to collect, and you have the most evidence to suggest that they're the real deal. TGI imports, I'm sorry, I have to apologize for that. I've labeled it TDI and I've been saying TDI earlier. It's actually TGI Imports of Knoxville, Tennessee. I've owned one of those guns. They're the ones that I would consider you have to scrutinize a little bit more because they're the one manufacturer, one importer that really blurred the lines between is this made in Romania and was it assembled in Romania? Because a lot of their stuff is labeled made in Romania, but there's a big question as to whether or not it was put together in the United States or put together in Romania. Not saying that it's not possible that they were. A lot of people have claimed that they were, but I just have a little bit less confidence in that, and that's the one. That's where you need more scrutiny as a collector. That's where you need to handle the gun, maybe look at it personally to kind of really see what's going on there and make a decision based on other factors like, does everything match? Do the rivets look really nice? Does it look like it was assembled in the United States kind of haphazardly? That kind of thing. Do the finishes match? But one thing I will put in as another disclaimer is I believe Century, and even in the Romarm era, did a lot of playing around with this made in Romania thing, where it's like, hey, this was made in Romania. It's like, okay, well, the receiver was made in Romania, all the parts were made in Romania, it has all Romanian parts, but it was assembled in the United States. And they weren't very honest with that. They were never honest with that in their marketing, and it's really annoying. I wish that they had just, come up with some system where they're like, okay, these rifles, maybe by model name, were made here, and these are original Romanian guns. Why couldn't they have done that? That was really shady. So any gun, if you see a gun and it looks perfect, it's a Romarm gun, it's marked CN Romarm SA Cougar, and it's got all the right deals going on, and you're thinking about it, you still got to take it with a grain of salt and say, okay, I still have to look at this and maybe ask a few questions to really make a determination, whether it's tier 1 or it's tier 2. Rat Mill era guns, again, I own one of those. I actually own two of those. I own two Romac 3s. They have the widest variety of markings, and the problem I have with that era from roughly early 1990s till 2004, till Romania joined NATO, that was a tumultuous time. It was a really bad time. I collect a lot of other Comblock guns. I collect Vepers, and the Vepers from that period are also a little tumultuous. They had different markings, and things were just really bad for the former communist countries in those years. So they also have the widest variety of variation in markings that I've seen. They're really difficult to tell whether they're tier 1 or tier 2. Not saying that you can't have a tier 1 gun in there, but I have a feeling most of them are tier 2s. They're kit builds. But if you have other information, let me know. The other thing that's very interesting is Bayonet Lugs. Bayonet Lugs have a lot of information in them, and it's a little bit of a kind of a trick when you're into collecting PSLs. So we know for a fact that between 1994 and 2004, during the U.S. assault weapons ban, that rifles with bayonet lugs were not allowed to come into the United States. It was just not allowed to come. They were not. You couldn't sell those. So almost all the bayonet lugs that I've seen, especially from those Rat Mill era guns, have demilled bayonet lugs. Some of them kind of look like they might have a functional bayonet lug, but when you really look at it, they're machined off on the sides into kind of a block shape, so a bayonet can't actually stick onto it, or they're just completely kind of cut off. There's still like a loop on the barrel, but it's been completely machined away where the actual lug was. So, when you see a gun from 94 to 2004 and it has a bayonet lug, first of all, that might actually have been illegal at the time. It's not illegal anymore, but if it has a functional bayonet lug, then I doubt it was a tier 1 gun. I just doubt it. I don't think it was assembled in Romania. The later imports throughout, maybe about 2000 to 2005, 2006, in that era, kind of transitional between rat mill and Romarm and into the Romarm era, you actually do see bayonet lugs. You see a lot of rifles. Some have bayonet lugs, some don't. It's difficult to tell in that era what came in, because you could import a rifle with a bayonet lug in that era. I will say that after about 2006, though, until the end of these imports in around 2009, I don't see any bayonet lugs on these rifles. The vast majority of these Romarm guns don't have bayonet lugs, and it doesn't look like they ever did. And the current high quality images that are on Romarm's site, the rifle does not have bayonet lugs. And in some of the other pictures that I see of PSLs when they're kind of being marketed at shows and stuff like that, I don't see bayonet lugs. So little confused about that, but you can there's some information there. At least between 1992 and maybe 2004, it really is going to be very difficult to justify the idea that a gun came into the United States, was imported in with a functioning bayonet lug. So one more point with regards to bayonet lugs. Another thing that is very telling is the flash hider. So the flash hider on PSLs, definitely in the military era, it seems as if those kits were numbered. The actual flash hider was numbered. And if you have a rifle, or if you see a rifle that has a removable flash hider, I think it's safe to say that it did not come in before 2004 because of the assault weapons ban, and because the timing was so difficult. It's not that it wasn't possible that it didn't come in slightly before the assault weapons ban starting in 1994, but I just think it would be very rare. There's no evidence, again, to suggest that full rifles, completed rifles came in that early time period, that early rat mill era. So, a removable flash hider, for the most part, for me, is a dead giveaway that it is not a Romanian built gun. For the most part, I'm not saying that there aren't a few that could have followed, especially in the post 2004 era, but it seems by 2006, 2007, almost all the rifles that I can see that I would say those are tier 1 guns, they have the pinned type flash hider, and that's the current rifle that's on their website. So, I'm going to run with that and say that if you have a removable flash hider, it's most likely a kit build. The ones that I've seen that are all removable flash hiders, they could have come in, I guess, during the assault weapons ban between 94 and 2004 as kind of like tack welded, and then people ground them off. That's possible. Although, there's probably some kind of evidence of that. Something cut or something, that's been messed with. And except for the Century offering, so Century in 2013 offered a very small lot of maybe 50 rifles for around $850 that had removable flash hiders. A lot of them had bayonet lugs too, and but those were built off of Nodak receivers, so those were obviously made in the United States. So, just that bit of information too. Look at the bayonet lug and look at that flash hider, and kind of decide for yourself: does it make sense that this gun is a tier 1? I would be suspect of that. All right. That was my presentation on how to collect a PSL. Hopefully there was some decent information there. Hopefully I didn't get everything wrong. Hopefully some of it is right. But these are just fantastic rifles, guys. They're truly authentic Comblock era DMR rifles. This one shoots 1.5 minutes with just box ammo, steel case, box ammo. I've been shooting it for years. It's very accurate, very reliable. It's one of those rifles that will always kind of, I think, suffer from the Dragunov comparisons, but it's really a authentic DMR Comblock era rifle, just like an M76 is, or a Tabuk or something like that from Iraq. It's got a lot of history, and this thing is still being used. It's still being used all over the place. You typically see them in the Middle East in all these conflicts, including the current conflict in Syria. So this gun is still being used in many ways against us. So I think it's very important that we understand that. And thank you for paying attention. And if you have some more information or something else to add, I'm sorry this video was kind of long-winded, but thank you for your time. And let's expand the knowledge base and make it so that these guns really start to become a little bit more, that we start to have a little bit more information when we buy these things and collect these things. Thank you for your time.